The morning light filtered through the crystalline domes of the memorial gardens on New Providence, casting rainbow patterns across names carved into black stone. Jaren traced his fingers over one particular inscription. Kellis of House Meridian, scholar 3rd class, died in the 23rd year of the Great Flight. His great-grandfather, a man who had chosen to stay behind on a dying ship so others could escape, so his daughter could live, so Jaren could stand here now under an alien sun and choose what kind of person he would become. Jaren was 27 standard years old, born on this world, and he had grown tired of being a symbol, the grateful refugee descendant, the success story of humanity's compassion. He was a botanist for the stars' sake, studying soil systems and bacterial colonies. He wore stained coveralls and spent his days elbow-deep in dirt, trying to prove that the Ascari were more than their history of running and hiding. Around him, the gardens breathed with peaceful morning energy. Human children chased each other between memorial stones, their laughter echoing off the domes. An elderly Ascari woman tended flowering vines, plants from the old world that would never be seen again, except in carefully maintained gardens like these. The air smelled of those alien flowers mixing with human roses, two worlds growing side by side. Jaren placed fresh blooms at the base of his great-grandfather's memorial and began humming an old Ascari song about starlight and home. The ritual felt hollow today, performed out of obligation rather than connection. He was about to leave when the alarm began. The wail cut through the morning calm like a blade drawn across skin. Jaren's communicator buzzed against his wrist, displaying an emergency alert he had never seen in his lifetime. Unknown vessels detected. All citizens report to designated shelters. This is not a drill. The timestamp read 7:51 a.m. Jaren looked up through the transparent dome and saw nothing but the yellow sun and blue sky of New Providence, but somewhere beyond that sky, something had arrived, something that made the Colonial Defense Network scream in panic. He ran. 300 light-years away, at Jump Gate Gamma 9 on the edge of human territory, Admiral Taliesin stared at sensor displays showing 15 massive energy signatures bleeding into normal space through the jump point. He was 87 years old, though he looked barely 50 thanks to life extension treatments. He had been a young ensign of 34 when his survey ship found the Ascari refugees drifting in the outer Sol system, barely alive, their vessels held together with desperation and prayers. He had made them a promise that day. Standing in an airlock while a terrified young Ascari woman named Sylveth clutched a data crystal containing all her people's knowledge, he had promised her that humanity would protect them, that they would be safe. Now, standing on the bridge of the UHNS Defiant, he watched those 15 signatures resolve into warship profiles, and he felt the weight of 53 years pressing down on his shoulders like lead. His son commanded one of the destroyers in the defense fleet, the Starward Promise, newly commissioned, barely tested in real combat. Taliesin pushed that thought down deep where it could not interfere with command decisions. Captain Lyra Kessick materialized at his side, her gray eyes already calculating firing solutions and escape vectors. She was 39, built like a coiled spring, with combat experience that showed in scars on her hands and the way she moved, always ready, always aware. Configuration unknown, she said quietly. Mass readings suggest Dreadnought class or larger. They are broadcasting on all frequencies. Let me hear it. The bridge speakers crackled to life with a voice that was deep and resonant, utterly alien. The translation software rendered it in crisp English, but the underlying harmonics made teeth ache and skin crawl. We have come for what is ours. Return the stolen ones. Taliesin felt something ancient and cold settle in his chest. He had known this day might come. Every officer who had studied the Ascari refugee crisis knew, but knowing and experiencing were different things entirely. Open a channel, he ordered. This is Admiral Taliesin of the United Human Nations Fleet. You have entered sovereign human territory without authorization. Identify yourselves and state your intentions. The response came immediately, as if they had been waiting 100 years for exactly this question. We are the Vrothian Empire, inheritors of the Sacred Order, masters of 53 conquered species. We have no need of your authorization, primitive. You possess property stolen from us 100 cycles ago, a species called the Ascari. They will be returned to us within 72 of your hours. This is not negotiable. Aboard the Vrothian flagship Pinnacle of Order, Sub-Commander Threx stood at his tactical station and monitored the human response. He was 68 years old by Vrothian reckoning, with 40 years of military service marked on his armor in mathematical notation. He was smaller than Archon Vex'kal by nearly a foot, his rank insufficient to warrant the ornate armor of supreme command, but his mind was sharp enough to see patterns others missed, including patterns that troubled him. During the long journey to this system, Threx had studied human history as required by tactical protocol. What he found disturbed him in ways he could not fully articulate to his fellow officers. Humans were chaotic, violent, contradictory. They had nearly destroyed themselves multiple times, but they also showed a capacity for what they called solidarity, the ability to sacrifice for others, to form bonds across boundaries that Vrothian doctrine said should be absolute. Threx had been raised on stories of the Great Betrayal when his own species had been slaves to the Kel ascendancy 800 years ago. He knew the taste of chains passed down through genetic memory and cultural trauma. The Vrothians had broken free through absolute unity, perfect discipline, mathematical precision. They had sworn never to be slaves again. But in achieving that freedom, had they simply become new masters? The question was treasonous, dangerous. Threx pushed it down and focused on his displays, watching the human admiral's response. "Prepare visual channel," Taliesin ordered quietly. The main view screen flickered, and Archon Vex'kal appeared. He was massive, easily 8 feet tall, encased in armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His face was angular and predatory, with eyes that glowed a dull red and mandibles that moved with each word. Mathematical symbols adorned his armor, equations rendered as art, philosophy expressed as pure function. Behind him, Threx could be seen at his station, and several other officers maintaining perfect formation. "So these are the humans," Vex'kal said, his mandibles clicking. "The primitives who stumbled into space, traveled barely a century ago, and thought themselves worthy to interfere in ancient grievances." Taliesin studied the Vrothian leader. He had dealt with enough alien species to recognize genuine conviction versus calculated posturing. Vex'kal believed what he was saying. That made him more dangerous, not less. "The Ascari are free citizens under the protection of the Sanctuary Accords," Taliesin said carefully. "They are not property. They will not be surrendered." Vex'kal's mandibles spread in what might have been amusement or a threat display. "The Ascari had purpose under our guidance. They designed our ships, perfected our weapons, decoded the mathematics of faster-than-light travel. For 12 generations, they contributed to something greater than their small fears. Then they stole our vessels and fled like cowards into uncharted space." The Archon leaned forward slightly. "We searched for decades, and then we found them here, under the protection of a species that has no understanding of the order they have disrupted. You offer them chaos, Admiral. We offered them structure, meaning, a place in something eternal." "You offered them chains," Taliesin said evenly. "Chains?" Vex'kal's laugh was genuine. "Such limited thinking. The Ascari were part of a grand design, a mathematical proof of civilization's highest form. Individual freedom is chaos. Chaos is suffering. We saved them from that suffering." There was something in the way he said it that made Taliesin realize this was not merely propaganda. Vex'kal truly believed that slavery was a kind of mercy, that rigid hierarchy was the only alternative to anarchy. It was a worldview so fundamentally alien that no amount of negotiation could bridge the gap. 72 hours, human," Vex'kal said. "Return them, or we will teach you what happens to those who harbor stolen property." The screen went dark. In the resulting silence, Taliesin could hear his own heartbeat, the hum of the ship's reactors, the quiet breathing of his bridge crew. He thought of his son on the starward promise. He thought of Sylveth, now ancient and frail. He thought of promises made 53 years ago to desperate people who had nowhere else to run. "Get me Dr. Sylveth," he said quietly, "and convene an emergency session of the Defense Council." It is time everyone understood what we are protecting them from. Dr. Sylveth was 134 years old, ancient by Ascari standards. She had been young when the Great Flight began, barely into adulthood, her mind sharp with mathematical genius and her hands unmarked by the kind of scars that came later. Now those hands trembled as she boarded the emergency shuttle to Terra Station, her body failing, but her mind still cutting through problems like a laser through fog. She arrived at Taliesin's office 8 hours after the Vrothian ultimatum. He was older now, she noted. The young man who had pulled her people from the void was now gray-haired and marked by time, though life extension kept him functional. They had known each other for more than half a century, bound by a promise that was about to be tested in fire. "You want to know if it is true," she said, settling into a chair designed for human proportions. "If we were truly their property." "I want to know what we are facing," Taliesin replied, "what they will do, what they are capable of." Sylveth was silent for a long moment, her trembling hands folding in her lap. Then she began to speak, and her voice carried the weight of 134 years. "My grandmother was born free, on a planet called Ascari Prime, orbiting a binary star system. We were artists, philosophers, scientists. We achieved interstellar travel through mathematical elegance, not conquest." She paused, her large, reflective eyes focusing on something beyond the walls, beyond 53 years of sanctuary, beyond the present moment into memories that still had teeth. "The Vrothians came when I was a child. I remember looking up and seeing their ships blot out both our suns. They gave us one choice: serve or die. My people chose survival. We thought it would be temporary." Her voice did not crack, but something in it hardened like metal cooling. "We did not understand that to them we were not beings making a choice. We were resources being acquired, valuable assets to be preserved and utilized." Taliesin listened, his hands clenched behind his back. He had read the historical files, but hearing it from her was different. This was not data. This was memory carved into neural patterns, trauma that lived in the body. 12 generations, Sylveth continued. My great-grandfather designed the plasma cannon that destroyed the last Kelhari resistance fleet. My grandfather perfected the dimensional mathematics that let them conquer the Silex worlds. My father, she stopped. Her hands went to the data crystal she wore on a chain around her neck, the same one she had carried onto Taliesin's ship 53 years ago. My father tried to sabotage their shield systems, built in a harmonic weakness that could collapse the entire matrix if you knew the frequency. He was caught before he could finish. They executed him in front of the entire Ascari engineering corps as a lesson. "The weakness," Taliesin said quietly. "Is it still there?" "Yes," Sylveth's eyes met his. "But they have had a century to improve the design. I do not know if it will work. And using it requires getting close enough to scan their shields in real time, close enough to, how close? 100 meters, maybe less." Taliesin felt his stomach drop. In void combat, that was not engagement range. That was collision range, suicide range. "We will need to build the disruptors," he said. "Retrofit every ship in the fleet. Can you do it in 72 hours? Sylveth looked at her trembling hands, at the data crystal containing her father's final equations, at the human admiral who was about to ask his people to die for hers. "If we have every engineer on New Providence working without sleep," she said, "and if we are very lucky, and if the mathematics cooperate, then yes, maybe. Then let us begin." But first came the emergency session, held at Summit Hall on Earth via quantum-entangled channels. Representatives from the major governance councils assembled in a chamber that had seen debates about trade and territory, but never this. Never a vote on whether to surrender citizens to slavers or face potential extinction. Minister Edric Lowell stood at the podium, his hands gripping its edges. He was a political creature by nature, built for compromise and careful navigation. The datapad in front of him showed casualty projections that made his pragmatism feel like the only sane response to insanity. "We must be realistic," Lowell said, his voice carrying across the chamber. 15 battleships against 7 combat-capable vessels in the sector. Current projections show 65% casualty rates across our fleet. The Vrothians could then proceed to New Providence unopposed. We lose the Ascari anyway, and thousands of our people die in the process. He looked around at faces he had worked with for years. Perhaps a compromise, a negotiated settlement, volunteers from among the Ascari, reduced numbers that might satisfy their demands while saving lives on both sides. General Isaac Trent rose from his seat, his voice cutting through the chamber like a saw through bone. He was 68, built like a wall, with a chest full of medals and a reputation for never retreating once engaged. "You are talking about handing over people," he said. "Citizens. People who have lived under our protection for 2 generations. You want to ask for volunteers to be shipped back to slavery? To save ourselves the cost of keeping our word?" "I want to avoid a war we cannot win," Lowell shot back, genuine anguish in his voice. "A war that could cost millions of human lives. We have a responsibility to our own people first." "We have a responsibility to our word," Trent countered. "Every species in this galaxy is watching. If we break our promises when threatened, what is our protection worth?" Taliesin watched the debate via secure feed from the Defiant, his jaw tight. Beside him, Ambassador Nadira Fell stood with her arms crossed. She was 44, with diplomatic credentials spanning 3 first contacts. She had always believed that communication could bridge any gap. The conflict on her face suggested that belief was being tested. "They are afraid," Fell said quietly. "Can you blame them?" "Fear is understandable," Taliesin replied. "Cowardice is not." The vote came at 11:34 p.m. Earth Standard Time. The Sanctuary Accords would be honored. No Ascari would be surrendered. If that meant war, humanity would face it. Taliesin felt no relief, only the weight of what came next. On New Providence, Matriarch Maurice called a gathering in the central square. The space filled with Ascari citizens, their silver-blue faces turned toward their elected leader. Maurice was 67, 2nd generation, born during the flight but too young to remember the old world. She had spent her life building this community under human protection. Now she had to tell them that protection was about to be paid for in blood. "The Vrothians have found us," she said, her voice carried across the square by amplification systems. 15 warships at the edge of human space, demanding our return within 72 hours. The crowd erupted, fear and anger creating a sound like wind through dying trees. Maurice raised her hands for quiet. "The human government has voted to honor the Sanctuary Accords. They will not surrender us." She paused, letting that sink in. "But that means war. A war they might not win. A war where humans will die protecting us." An elderly Ascari woman stood, her voice cracking with age and memory. "I remember Earth's ships finding us. I remember their faces when they saw us, half dead, starving, desperate. I will not repay that kindness by letting their children die for us. We should go. We should surrender." Her name was Mevris, 1st generation, one of the original refugees. She had survived the Great Flight, lost 3 children during it, and spent 53 years trying to build something worth that sacrifice. Now she was saying it would be better to give up. A younger male, Jaren's age, shouted back, "My mother ran so I could be born free, not hunted. If we surrender now, what was the point?" The argument raged. Jaren stood in the crowd, listening, feeling something build in his chest. He thought of his great-grandfather staying behind on a dying ship. He thought of the memorial gardens where names were carved in stone. He thought of his coveralls stained with soil from peaceful work, and how naive that peace had been. He pushed through the crowd to a platform. "My great-grandfather died during the Great Flight," Jaren said, and the crowd quieted. "He was a scholar, 3rd class, property valuable enough to keep alive but not valuable enough to care about his name. He died making sure my grandmother reached a lifeboat while the Vrothians closed in." The square fell silent. "He died so we could choose. Not so we could be safe. Safety was never guaranteed. So we could choose what kind of lives to live, what kind of people to be." Jaren's hands trembled, but his voice stayed steady. "I choose to fight. I choose to stand with the humans who gave us that choice. And if I die doing it, I will have died free. That is more than 12 generations of my ancestors could say." The response was not unanimous, but it was loud. Others stood, echoing his words. And in the back of the crowd, Mevris watched Jaren, Kellis's great-grandson, carrying forward a choice made in desperation 53 years ago, and felt terror, or with something that might have been pride, but she did not change her position. Later that night, She would lead a small group of first-generation Ascari to a quiet meeting where they discussed the unthinkable, offering themselves as volunteers to spare the young ones. The decision was made. The Ascari would help. More than that, they would fight. In a facility buried under New Providence's primary dome, Dr. Sylveth spread holographic schematics across a conference table. Lieutenant Tobin Rhee stood beside her, his young face tight with concentration. He was 28, barely out of the academy, with engineering credentials that were technically impressive, but practically untested. He had been assigned to New Providence because it was quiet. Now he was working with a 134-year-old alien scientist to weaponize knowledge bought with blood, with just over 70 hours before those ships came to kill them all. This is the shield matrix, Sylveth said, her trembling fingers moving through the hologram. My father worked on it before he died. The harmonic frequency operates on quantum resonance, elegant, powerful, but vulnerable to counter-harmonics at close range. She zoomed in on specific components. If you can generate the inverse frequency, the shield collapses, but you must be close enough to scan their shields in real time, 100 meters, maybe less. Rhee ran calculations on his datapad. Doctor, that is suicide range. We would be inside their weapon envelope, shields overlapping. Yes. And the disruptor would draw massive power. Ships using it would be vulnerable, weapons offline, engines at minimum. Yes. Rhee looked at the schematics. The mathematics were brilliant. The engineering challenges were staggering. They would need to strip civilian vessels for parts, repurpose equipment, build custom emitters with nanometer tolerances. They would need every engineer working without sleep. And they would need luck. If we do this, he said slowly, and people use these weapons, the radiation feedback will be lethal, Sylveth finished, to Vrothians and humans alike. My father designed it that way. He wanted any Vrothian ship that tried to use these frequencies against itself to suffer the consequences. But humans do not have Vrothian biology. The radiation will affect your crews differently, faster, worse. Rhee stared at her. You are telling me that every time we fire this weapon, we poison our own people. I am telling you that my father died trying to give the Ascari any weapon at all. What you do with it is your choice. Rhee thought about Admiral Taliesin, about the crews who would trust their lives to his work, about his own hands that had never built anything meant to kill before. Then we make it work, he said, and we make damn sure every shot counts. They worked through the night. Engineering bays that normally produced fusion reactor improvements became weapons foundries. Ascari scientists who had spent their lives on peaceful research turned their knowledge toward war. Human engineers learned Vrothian design philosophy, their improvisational approach clashing with and eventually complementing Ascari precision. And something strange began to happen. On the second day of construction, a human technician named Delina Kor was working alongside an Ascari physicist named Thales on power coupling calibrations. They had been struggling with energy distribution for hours, running calculations that kept producing errors. Then, Delina suggested an approach that was mathematically impossible but intuitively felt right. Thales started to explain why it could not work, then stopped. His hands moved across the holographic interface, adjusting Delina's suggestion with mathematical precision she could not have articulated but somehow knew was needed. The calibration worked. They stared at each other for a moment, awareness of something odd passing between them. Then they moved on to the next problem, and the strangeness faded. But Rhee noticed, and when he checked the sensor logs later, he saw energy readings that made no sense. Brief spikes of quantum entanglement between the human and Ascari neural patterns, synchronization that should not occur between different species. He filed it as a sensor glitch and moved on. There was too much work to waste time on impossible data. Sylveth did not dismiss it. She had seen these patterns before, in ancient Ascari texts from before the Vrothian conquest, and she felt a cold weight settle in her chest, because if she was right about what this meant, the war was about to become something far more dangerous than anyone realized. Ambassador Nadira Fell made one final attempt at diplomacy. She arranged a meeting on a civilian station at the neutral marker between the fleets. Commander Jal arrived representing the Vrothian Empire, smaller than Vex'kal, but no less imposing in armor inscribed with mathematical equations. Fel brought her best team, her most carefully prepared arguments, and a desperate hope that perhaps understanding could bridge this gap. "The Ascari have built lives here," she said, appealing to something that might be empathy. "Families, children born free. Surely you can understand the cruelty of tearing families apart." Jal's mandibles moved in what might have been confusion. The Empire understands order. The Ascari's escape created technological stagnation that lasted a century. Only now have we recovered what was lost. Their return will restore balance. "They are not technology," Fel said, frustration bleeding through her training. "They are people. They are resources that belong to the Empire." Jal leaned forward. "Ambassador, your species is young. You do not understand galactic realities. The strong organize the weak. The capable direct the lesser. This is mathematical certainty." He gestured to the equations on his armor. "Perfect symmetry, perfect balance. This is what the Empire provides. Structure to chaos, purpose to randomness. The Ascari were brilliant, but brilliance without structure is merely noise." Fel studied the equations and realized with sinking dread that they were beautiful. Complex harmonic functions that balanced perfectly, creating patterns that satisfied something deep in the mathematical centers of consciousness. Jal believed what he was saying. This was not cruelty masked as philosophy. This was genuine conviction that enslavement was order, that chains were structure, that control was kindness. There was no bridge to cross, no shared foundation to build understanding upon. "We are done here," Fel said quietly. She returned to her shuttle and transmitted 3 words to Taliesin. "Diplomacy has failed." On the 4th day before the deadline, they tested the first disruptor. Lieutenant Ree stood in the testing bay with Sylveth, both of them exhausted beyond measure, watching a scaled-down prototype charge. "Power level stable," a technician called out. "Frequency modulation locked. Firing in 3, 2, 1. The disruptor activated. For 30 seconds it performed perfectly, generating the inverse harmonic that theory demanded. Then the power coupling overloaded. Feedback cascaded through the system. A technician's hands were badly burned as she tried to shut it down manually. Medical teams rushed her to treatment while Ree stared at the smoking wreckage of their prototype. "It is not working," he said, exhaustion making his voice flat. Sylveth looked at the equations again, her ancient mind still sharp despite her body's failing. She made an adjustment, then another. The mathematics shifted, found new balance. "Try this," she said, and uploaded new parameters. They rebuilt. They tested again. This time it lasted 2 minutes before overloading. Progress. By hour 48, they had a working prototype. By hour 60, they had installed the first disruptor on the Defiant. By hour 70, all 7 ships in the defense fleet carried weapons that might collapse Vrothian shields, if they could get close enough, if the frequencies were right, if luck held, and if the crews were willing to poison themselves with radiation to use them. On New Providence's surface, Corporal Dasha Oren trained Ascari volunteers in basic combat protocols. She was 31, career military, with 12 years of service including brutal anti-piracy operations. She had joined because raiders killed her parents when she was 15, and she understood viscerally what it meant to be defenseless. Now, she watched Jaren fumble with a rifle's safety mechanism and saw that same helplessness in his large, reflective eyes. "You ever fire a weapon before?" she asked. "Academic simulations," Jaren admitted. "I'm a botanist." Oren laughed, short and sharp. "Well, nitrogen-fixing bacteria are not going to help if a Vrothian breaches your position. But these rifles are simple. Point, pull trigger, watch the target fall down." "Is it that simple?" Oren's smile faded. She thought about her first firefight, the smell of blood and ozone, the way her hands had shaken for hours afterward. "No, kid, it is never that simple. But sometimes simple is all we have." She walked him through the basics over the next few days. How to brace, how to acquire targets, how to conserve ammunition. Around them, other Marines trained other Ascari volunteers. It was surreal, teaching peaceful scientists and artists how to kill. But Oren had read the casualty projections. She knew what happened to undefended civilian populations when professional soldiers came hunting. On the day before the deadline, Jaren asked her, "Why are you doing this? Teaching us, I mean. You could resent having to fight for aliens." Orin checked her rifle, hands moving with practiced efficiency. My parents died because no one was there to protect them. I will not let that happen to anyone else if I can help it. Human, Ascari, does not matter. People are people. Jaren nodded slowly, his fingers checking his own rifle's safety, a gesture that was becoming automatic. I was born free, he said, and I want my children, if I have any, to be born free too. If I hide while others fight for that, what kind of person am I? Yeah, Orin said quietly, thinking of her parents. Yeah, I get that. At 12 hours before the deadline, Admiral Taliesin reviewed fleet dispositions one final time. 7 ships against 15. The Defiant, Burning Answer, Unbroken, and 4 destroyers, Starward Promise, Valiant, Steadfast, Guardian. His son commanded the Starward Promise, Lieutenant Commander Davos Taliesin, 32 years old, brilliant and brave, and so much like his mother, it made Rourke's chest ache. They had spoken briefly via secure channel the previous night. No emotional goodbyes, just quiet acknowledgement of what was coming. I know what you promised them, Dad, Davos had said. I believe in it too. We all do. Now, Rourke stood on the Defiance bridge and tried not to think about his son's ship among the deployment markers on the tactical display. Captain Keswick joined him. Sir, crew requests for personal messages are flooding in. Last wills, recordings. They know what the odds are. I know. Taliesin had his own message prepared, sealed in his quarters. Words for his sister, for Davos if the boy survived and Rourke did not. Are you asking me to stand down, Captain? No, sir. I'm asking if you have any last words for the fleet. Taliesin thought about that. About what he could say to people who were about to die for a promise made before most of them were born. Tell them, he said, that we are going to fight dirty, fight mean, and make every meter cost more than they are willing to pay. Tell them that if we die today, we die free, and we die protecting others' freedom. There are worse ways to go. Keswick smiled, grim and fierce. Yes, sir. At 1 hour before the deadline, Taliesin sent his final transmission to Vex'kal. Supreme Archon, this is Admiral Taliesin. The Ascari are citizens of New Providence, under protection of the United Human Nations. You have 1 hour to leave our territory, or learn why we do not break our promises. The response came within seconds. Vex'kal's face filled the view screen, mandibles spread. You have never faced true military power, human. In 1 hour, you will understand your place, and when your ships are debris, I will deliver the Ascari back to their proper function. Every species in this galaxy will know what happens to those who defy the Vrothian Empire. Then come and try, Taliesin said. The channel closed. The next hour stretched like years. Taliesin walked through the Defiance corridors, seeing crew members at their stations, young faces and old human determination, facing mathematical certainty. He touched the walls as he passed, feeling the vibration of reactors building to combat readiness. This vessel had been his command for 15 years. He knew every corridor, every junction, every quirk of its systems. He wondered if he would live to walk these corridors again. At 12 p.m. exactly, the Vrothian fleet advanced. They came in perfect formation, mathematical precision that was both beautiful and terrifying. 15 massive dreadnoughts moving as one entity, dark hulls absorbing starlight, weapons charging with power that made sensor displays scream warnings. Aboard the pinnacle of order, Threx watched the human response and felt his mandibles click nervously. The humans were not assuming defensive positions. They were not requesting further negotiations. They were charging. All ships, battle stations, Taliesin ordered. This is a knife fight, people. Get close, get mean. Make them pay for every meter. The human fleet accelerated to attack speed, fusion drives screaming at 110% capacity, and as they charged, they began broadcasting across all electromagnetic frequencies. Not communications, not tactical data, music. Specifically, human war music, a chaotic blend of drums and horns and electronic noise that defied mathematical harmonics. The sound waves interfered with Vrothian communication channels, which relied on precise frequency modulation. Threx's tactical displays flickered as the music degraded their systems. Around him, officers struggled to filter the noise. Their communications became choppy, uncertain. They are weaponizing disorder, Threx said quietly, something like reluctant admiration in his voice. The Vrothian fleet opened fire at extreme range. Plasma bolts lanced across the void at relativistic speeds, each shot calibrated by targeting computers of perfect accuracy. But the human ships did not move in predictable patterns. The Burning Answer's shields flared as plasma struck. Warning klaxons filled its bridge, but instead of retreating, the battlecruiser launched debris, scrap metal, empty fuel pods, construction materials. The debris scattered across Vrothian firing solutions, creating false targets that degraded targeting accuracy. The human fleet deployed nuclear mines in their wake, creating fields of delayed detonation weapons that turned their advance into a death trap for pursuers. When Vrothian pursuit formations hit the mines, tactical nukes detonated, designed to cripple rather than destroy, but effective at disrupting formations and forcing ships to scatter. In that moment of chaos, the Defiant reversed thrust and charged directly at the Iron Verdict, the fleet's second-largest dreadnought. On the Defiant's bridge, Taliesin gripped his command chair as the ship shook from point defense fire. "Shields to maximum forward arc. Lieutenant Ray, prepare the disruptor." Ree's hands moved across his console, face tight with concentration. "Disruptor armed, sir. But we are still 5 kilometers out. We need 100 meters for effective scanning and frequency adjustment. Then we get to 100 meters. Helm, close to ramming distance." The Defiant accelerated directly at the Iron Verdict. Point defense cannons tore into its hull, chewing through armor. Damage reports flooded in, hull breaches on decks 4 through 7, casualties mounting. The ship shook with impacts that sounded like gods hammering on metal. 4 kilometers. 3, 2. "Sir, they are charging their main cannon," Ensign Tabriz called out. "They are going to core us. 1 kilometer, 500 meters, 200 meters. At 87 meters, with the Vrothian dreadnought's main cannon glowing with lethal energy, Taliesin gave the order. Fire. Reactivated the disruptor. Power drained from every non-essential system. The bridge lights flickered, and a pulse of energy, barely visible, carrying frequencies calculated by a dead Ascari engineer 53 years ago, struck the Iron Verdict's shields. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the shields flickered. Harmonic resonance cascaded into destructive interference. Quantum tunneling effects created microscopic breaches that expanded exponentially. The shield matrix collapsed, and at 87 meters, human railguns fired. Tungsten slugs moving at 30 kilometers per second slammed into unprotected hull. The Iron Verdict's armor cracked. Atmosphere vented in frozen plumes. Internal systems failed. The great dreadnought shuddered, its perfect form marred by massive wounds. But on the Defiant's bridge, Ensign Tabriz collapsed at her station, blood running from her nose. Radiation from the disruptor at that range was catastrophic. Medical alerts screamed across every console. "All ships, disruptors work, but at terrible cost," Taliesin broadcast. "Every firing will poison your crew. Make your shots count." The human fleet swarmed. The Unbroken closed on a Vrothian cruiser, fired its disruptor from 93 meters, watched the shields fail. But the radiation flooded their forward compartments. Crew members fell at their stations, dying to deliver a single killing blow. The Starward Promise, commanded by Davos Taliesin, wove through Vrothian fire with desperate grace. Fightercraft launched from its bays, small vessels piloted by men and women who flew with suicidal creativity, their movements unpredictable, painting false sensor signatures and creating informational chaos. But the Vrothians adapted. They began targeting the smaller destroyers, trying to eliminate the most maneuverable threats. The Valiant found itself caught in crossfire from 2 dreadnoughts. Lieutenant Commander Mira Tantus saw death coming in plasma fire and made a choice. She ordered maximum power to the disruptor, set ramming speed toward the nearest Vrothian vessel, and had her crew evacuate to escape pods. But there was not enough time. Not everyone made it off. The Valiant's disruptor fired at contact range, collapsing the Vrothian cruiser's shields completely. Then, the destroyer's nose crumpled against the larger ship's hull. Its fusion reactor breached. Both vessels died in nuclear fire. Tantus's final words, transmitted in the seconds before her death: "New Providence, this is Valiant. Tell them we made it cost." Taliesin heard those words and felt something break inside him. 1 destroyer gone. His fleet was down to 6 ships, and the Vrothians still had 13 vessels operational, though damaged. The mathematics were still against them. On New Providence's surface, Jaren heard klaxons signaling atmospheric entry. Vrothian dropships descended through the sky like falling stars, their hulls glowing with re-entry heat. Corporal Oren checked her rifle one final time. Around her, Ascari volunteers gripped unfamiliar weapons with hands designed for mathematics and art, not killing. "Stay alive, keep your squad alive, make the bastards pay for every meter," Oren said, her voice carrying across the squad. Jaren nodded, his botanist's coveralls feeling absurd now. The dropships landed in the settlement's outskirts. Hatches opened. Vrothian warriors emerged, massive in armor, moving with mechanical precision. They advanced down what had been a quiet residential street. They did not see the human marines in upper-story windows until gunfire erupted. They did not notice Ascari volunteers flanking until shaped charges detonated against their armor. Jaren found himself in combat within minutes. He pressed against a wall, heart hammering, as plasma bolts scorched the air. The smell overwhelmed him, ozone and burning in chemicals. "Contact left," someone shouted. 3 Vrothian warriors advancing in wedge formation. Oren reached for a grenade, but Jaren saw something, a pattern in their movement matching descriptions from Sylveth's historical files. Vrothian combat doctrine, unchanged for centuries, always protecting the right flank. "Hit them from the left," Jaren shouted. Oren trusted him. She signaled coordinated flanking maneuver. When they opened fire from the Vrothians' weak side, the formation broke. One warrior went down, then another. Jaren stared at the fallen bodies and realized they could bleed. They could die. They were not unstoppable forces, but soldiers following doctrine, vulnerable to chaos and creativity. "Good eye, kid," Oren said then. "Get down." More Vrothians incoming. The battle for New Providence had begun in earnest. In orbit, the space battle reached crescendo. The burning answer took critical damage when a dreadnought's main cannon struck its port side. Half the ship went dark. But Captain Rorick Vex kept his vessel in the fight, using it as a shield for smaller ships, trading armor for time. His crew was dying from radiation exposure, from wounds, from system failures. But they fought on. The Starward Promise executed a perfect disruptor strike on a Vrothian heavy cruiser, collapsing its shields at 76 meters. Railguns fired. The cruiser died. But feedback from the disruptor flooded the Starward Promise's bridge. Admiral Taliesin felt his nose begin to bleed, tasted copper in his mouth, knew what it meant. Radiation poisoning, fast-acting and lethal. He had minutes, maybe less. "Keep firing," he ordered his crew, his voice already weakening. "Make every shot count." On the Defiance Bridge, Taliesin saw the Starward Promise's medical alerts, saw the radiation levels, knew what his son had done. "Davos," he whispered. No response. The channel was dead. Taliesin stood there for a moment, feeling everything he had ever feared condensed into this single point of agony. His son was dying, had maybe seconds left, and there was nothing. "Admiral," Keswick's voice cut through his grief. "The Vrothians are regrouping. They are preparing a coordinated push." Taliesin looked at the tactical display. Vex'kal was pulling his fleet back, reorganizing. 8 Vrothian ships still combat effective. The humans had 4 functional vessels and 2 crippled ones limping on emergency power. The Vrothians could still win this through coordinated firepower. One final push would overwhelm the human defenses. Taliesin had one card left to play. "Activate the broadcast," he ordered, his voice steady despite the void opening inside him. The message began transmitting across every frequency, on every channel in the system. It was not encrypted. It was meant to be heard by everyone. First came Ascari testimonies. Dr. Sylveth's voice describing 12 generations of slavery, designed to resonate on frequencies no jamming could block. Then, historical records, evidence of cultural genocides, data on 53 conquered species held in bondage. Finally, Taliesin's own voice. "To any species suffering under the Vrothian Empire, this is Admiral Taliesin of the United Human Nations. Humanity offers sanctuary. We will protect you. We will fight for you. Come to human space. You will be free." On the pinnacle of order, Vex'kal heard the broadcast and understood its implications with perfect clarity. This was not a plea. This was a weapon aimed at the foundations of empire itself. If this message spread, if it reached the 53 species under Vrothian control, if it gave them hope, "They have weaponized our own subjects against us," Commander Jal said. Vex'kal's claws dug into his command throne. He stared at the Defiant on his view screen. This battered human ship that refused to die, commanded by an admiral who had just declared war not on one fleet, but on the concept of hierarchy itself. Threx monitored his displays and saw something that made his mandibles freeze. "Supreme Archon, anomalous energy readings from the human fleet. Explain." "Their combat patterns combined with Ascari weapons are creating resonance effects in dimensional space. The frequencies match theoretical structures from the old archives, before the Empire, before the Kel." Threx's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "They are approaching Confluence mathematics." Silence on the bridge. Every Vrothian officer knew the stories. The Confluence had been the theoretical perfect state, multiple species working in absolute harmony, creating resonances that transcended individual capabilities. It was what the Kel ascendancy had feared, what had driven them to conquest and rigid hierarchy to prevent. "That is impossible," Vex'kal said. "The Confluence is myth." "I am reading the data, Supreme Archon." Threx displayed the sensor readings. Human chaos combined with Ascari precision creates emergent patterns. Each time they cooperate, the resonance grows stronger. If this continues, if humanity could achieve confluence with refugee species, if they could offer sanctuary and create something greater than the sum of parts, then the Empire's entire model would be threatened, not by military force, but by example. Vex'kal stared at the data, at the implications. His main cannon charged. Enough energy to crack a moon, aimed at the Defiant. Destroy them now. End this threat before it spreads. But his tactical computers projected outcomes. The broadcast had propagated through subspace relays. It was reaching slave worlds even now. If he destroyed the human fleet, they became martyrs. Rebellions would ignite while Vrothian forces were here, unable to respond. If he withdrew, humanity became a continuous drain on resources. But the Empire would retain strategic flexibility. And, most importantly, if the Confluence was manifesting, standard military doctrine from the old archives was explicit. Withdraw immediately, quarantine the phenomenon, return with specialized countermeasures designed to disrupt harmonic resonance. The Vrothians had fought the Confluence before, 800 years ago. They knew its power. They knew what it cost to stop. It was not mercy. It was mathematics. Cold, perfect, terrible mathematics. "Stand down," Vex'kal ordered. "Supreme Archon?" Jal turned, shock evident. "This battle is over, but the war has just begun. All ships withdraw to outer marker. Maintain combat readiness." The Vrothian fleet pulled back, slowly, maintaining formation, weapons charged, not retreat, strategic repositioning. The silence on the Defiance bridge was absolute. Then, slowly, broken by ragged cheers from crew members who had expected to die. Taliesin felt no triumph, only exhaustion and grief so profound it felt like drowning. "Casualty reports," he said quietly. Keswick consulted her datapad. 340 human casualties across the fleet, 2 ships destroyed, 3 requiring months of repair. She paused. "The Starward Promise reports critical radiation exposure. Captain Taliesin is—" "I know," Rourke said. He knew his son was dead or dying. He knew that keeping a promise made 53 years ago had cost him his child. He knew that 340 families would receive notifications that their loved ones died protecting people they had probably never met. And he knew he would make the same choice again. The aftermath took weeks to process. Ships limped to repair docks. Wounded filled medical facilities beyond capacity. Bodies were identified. Families notified. Funerals held. Admiral Taliesin died 3 hours after the battle ended, radiation poisoning shutting down his systems one by one. His father was not there. Rourke was still aboard the Defiant, coordinating rescue operations, being the admiral his fleet needed. He broke in private later, where no one could see. The memorial gardens on New Providence expanded. New names carved in black stone. Human Marines like Corporal Dasha Oren, who had died protecting Ascari volunteers. Fleet officers like Lieutenant Commander Mira Tantis, civilians caught in crossfire, and Admiral Taliesin, who had fired his disruptor, knowing what it would cost. Jaren placed flowers at the newest monuments, wearing the Star of Valor pinned to his coveralls. humanity's highest military decoration, awarded for tactical insights during ground combat. The medal felt wrong, heavy. People had died following his directions. Dr. Sylveth stood beside him, leaning on a cane, radiation burns hidden beneath sleeves. Her body was failing, exposure from working too close to the disruptors. "They will come back," she said. "Vex'kal will not accept this." "Will we be ready?" "We will have to be." 10 days after the battle, a Vrothian shuttle approached the neutral marker, broadcasting peaceful intentions. Admiral Taliesin, still aboard the damaged Defiant, authorized docking with extreme caution. From the shuttle emerged Sub-Commander Threx, armor stripped of rank insignias, carrying a data crystal. They met in a conference room. Threx's massive form seemed reduced, mandibles hanging loose in posture suggesting exhaustion. "Admiral Taliesin," Threx said, "I request asylum under your sanctuary accords." "Why?" "Because I have served the Empire for 40 years, participated in 17 pacification campaigns, and I have never seen anything like what you did." His mandibles clicked softly. "You turned defeat into strategic victory not through force, but through offering hope." Taliesin studied the alien. "What do you offer?" Threx placed the data crystal on the table. Tactical data from the battle, but more importantly, an explanation for why Archon Vex'kal withdrew. "We assumed strategic calculation." "That was part of it." Threx activated the crystal. Holographic displays filled the air, sensor readings showing cascading energy patterns, harmonic resonances that intensified when human and Ascari forces worked together. "What am I looking at?" "Proof that when your species combines with the Ascari, you create something we thought was myth, something the Empire has spent 800 years preventing." Dr. Sylveth entered at that moment, summoned by Taliesin. She looked at the data, her ancient eyes widening. "The mathematics," she whispered. "I have seen these patterns in the old archives my grandmother showed me before the Empire, when civilizations worked together." "Admiral," Threx said, "your species combined with the Ascari creates what we call the Confluence, a state where different civilizations merge strengths into something exponentially greater. The ancient empires feared it, proof there is another way besides control." Taliesin stared at the data. "We just fought together." "No." Sylveth moved closer, her trembling hands tracing patterns in the air. "Human creativity and Ascari precision do not just complement, they resonate. Your chaos finds order in our mathematics. Our calculations find expression in your improvisation." She stopped, her face going pale. "The Empire will not just return with more ships, they will come to destroy any possibility of confluence. Because if humanity can achieve this with us, you can achieve it with any refugee species. You will not just be a sanctuary, you will be an existential threat to Empire itself." The conference room fell silent. Taliesin looked at Threx, at Sylveth, at impossible mathematics floating in light. The promise he had made 53 years ago had just become a declaration of war against every empire in the galaxy. Mevris, the elder who had argued for surrender, came to see Jaren 3 weeks after the battle. She was dying. Plasma burns from defending human children when Vrothian warriors breached the residential sector. She had argued against fighting, then fought anyway when it mattered. "I was wrong," she told Jaren in the hospital. "I thought surrender would be mercy. But there is no mercy in chains, even comfortable ones. Your great-grandfather understood that. I had forgotten." She died 2 days later. Her name was added to the memorial. The Vrothian Empire did not attack immediately, but long-range sensors detected massive fleet movements 300 light-years away, construction of new vessels, mobilization of forces not seen since the Kel Wars 800 years ago. They were coming, and when they came, it would be with everything they had. But something else was happening too. Refugee ships began arriving at human colonies, first a trickle, then a stream. Species fleeing Vrothian control, following the broadcast's promise of sanctuary. Each one that arrived created new resonances, new patterns. The confluence grew stronger. 6 months after the battle, Taliesin stood in his quarters aboard the rebuilt Defiant. On his desk was a holoframe showing Davos as a child, laughing, alive, before the weight of promises and duty had claimed him. Sylveth's voice came over the comm. "Admiral, sensors are detecting another refugee ship, Kelhari design. They are broadcasting distress, requesting sanctuary. Taliesin looked at his son's image one more time. Then he straightened his uniform and headed to the bridge. "Send them approach coordinates," he ordered. "Tell them they are safe now." Behind him, in ways sensors could barely detect, the Confluence pulsed with soft light, mathematics and chaos finding harmony, different species building something new from shared choice rather than enforced order. The war was not over. It was only beginning. But for the first time in galactic history, there was an alternative to empire, and humanity would fight to protect it.